Good morning, everyone. Today, I want to talk to you about something that has the power to change the course of your life, the power to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. It's the same power that has fueled the greatest achievements of human history, and that is within you right now. That power is your potential. We all have dreams, we all have desires, but how many of us truly believe in our ability to make them a reality? How many of us have the courage to rise above our fears, our doubts, and take that first step towards something greater than ourselves? Today, I'm here to remind you of something simple, but profoundly important. You are capable of more than you can imagine. We often find ourselves standing at the crossroads of decision, unsure of which path to take. We can easily get trapped in the noise of our own thoughts, in the uncertainty of our circumstances, or the opinions of others. The truth is, fear and doubt can be powerful forces. They have the ability to hold us back from reaching our full potential, making us question our worth and our ability to succeed. But let me ask you a question. What if fear wasn't the end of the road? What if fear was the starting line of something much greater? What if you could look at your fears, acknowledge them, and still move forward with purpose? One of the most important things we can do in life is embrace fear, not as something to avoid, but as something to conquer. Fear is natural. Every person you admire, every successful individual who's achieved greatness has experienced fear. The difference is that they didn't let it control them. Instead, they used that fear as fuel to propel themselves forward. Take a moment and think about the last time you were afraid to do something. Was it trying something new? Making a big decision, speaking up when it felt uncomfortable? Now, think about what would have happened if you let that fear control you. What would your life look like today if you hadn't taken that step? The truth is, fear can either be a roadblock or a stepping stone. The choice is yours. There's a powerful saying that goes, the only way to grow is to step outside your comfort zone. And it's true. Growth doesn't happen in the familiar. It happens when we push ourselves beyond what we thought was possible. But pushing past that boundary requires something more than just the willingness to try. It requires determination, resilience, and unwavering belief in yourself. So how do we build that belief? How do we take that first step when everything inside of us is screaming it's too risky? I might fail. The answer lies in one of the most powerful forces in the world: commitment. Commitment is the key to unlocking your potential. When you commit to something, when you decide that you are going to give it everything you've got, you remove the option of turning back. You stop entertaining the idea of failure because you know that failure is simply a part of the process, not the end of the journey. When you commit, you put in the work, the effort, the perseverance. You show up every day, even when it's hard. Even when the road is long and the results don't come as quickly as you'd like, you keep going. Because you understand that every step forward, no matter how small, brings you closer to your goal. But commitment doesn't just happen overnight. It's something that we have to cultivate, something we have to choose every single day. It's a decision to keep going even when it seems like the odds are against you, a decision to stay focused on your vision, a decision to believe in the value of your efforts, even when the results are not immediately visible. There will be times when the road seems impossibly steep, and the dream feels just out of reach. But in those moments, remember that the greatest successes often come after the greatest struggles. The moments when you feel like quitting are often the moments just before your breakthrough. That's the point at which you have to push harder, dig deeper, and stay more committed than ever before. Commitment also requires accountability. You need to surround yourself with people who believe in you, who support you, and who will hold you accountable when you try to take shortcuts or give up. There's an old saying that goes, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. If you want to rise to new heights, you need to be around people who lift you up, who encourage you, and who challenge you to become the best version of yourself. In addition to commitment, another crucial element of success is self-discipline. It's easy to get distracted, to procrastinate, or to get lost in the pursuit of instant gratification. But success is built on the foundation of delayed gratification. It's about doing what you know is right, even when you don't feel like it. It's about making choices today that will pay off in the future. Self-discipline is what keeps you going when the excitement fades and the novelty wears off. It's what helps you stay focused on the bigger picture, even when the little things try to pull you off course. It's about developing the habit of showing up every day and doing the work, no matter what. But here's something I want you to remember. Self-discipline is not about being perfect. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about getting back on track when you fall off. It's about giving yourself grace when things don't go as planned and recommitting to your journey without giving up. Now, I know that on this journey, there will be times when you feel like you're walking alone. The world may seem indifferent or even hostile to your dreams. But let me remind you, you are never alone in this journey. There are countless others who have walked the same path, who have faced the same struggles, and who have come out victorious on the other side. You are part of a larger community of dreamers, doers, and achievers. And you have the power to make your mark, to leave your legacy, and to show the world what's possible when you believe in yourself. You have everything it takes to succeed. You have the strength to keep going when the going gets tough. You have the courage to face your fears head on, and you have the vision to see the possibilities that lie ahead. As you stand here today, remember that your potential is limitless. There is nothing you cannot achieve if you commit to it, if you believe in it, and if you never give up. Clarity and peace, understanding God's voice. In the midst of life's turbulence, when decisions feel overwhelming and confusion clouds your mind, there is something deeply powerful and comforting about experiencing clarity and peace. These qualities often accompany the voice of God, especially in moments when the path ahead seems unclear or difficult. But what is it that makes God's voice different from the thoughts we wrestle with every day? How can we discern between the peace and clarity that come from Him and the chaos that arises from our own minds? First, it's important to understand that God's voice does not speak in the same way as our inner thoughts. Our thoughts are often influenced by a myriad of factors: our emotions, past experiences, fears, and the pressures of the world around us. They can be loud, scattered, and filled with doubts or uncertainties. In contrast, God's voice tends to bring a quiet assurance, one that doesn't demand attention, but instead invites us to listen in stillness and surrender. Clarity in the voice of God. When we encounter God's voice, we often experience a sense of clarity that cuts through the noise of confusion. This clarity does not necessarily mean that we will understand everything or have all the answers immediately. Rather, it's a sense of knowing the next step or direction, even when the full picture is not yet revealed. It's a deep understanding that we are headed in the right direction, even if the road ahead is uncertain. For example, when God speaks to our hearts, it often brings a sense of peace about a decision, even when the decision itself is difficult. It may be a calling to step out in faith, to make a difficult choice, or to let go of something or someone. Despite the challenge, there is an undeniable peace that settles within, confirming that this is the right path. The clarity comes from knowing that we are being led by something greater than ourselves, and that there is a divine purpose behind our actions. This is in stark contrast to our own thoughts, which can often leave us feeling unsure or conflicted. When we make decisions based solely on our own reasoning or emotions, we might experience internal chaos, torn between what we want and what we feel is right, battling against the what-ifs and potential consequences. In these moments, it can be hard to discern truth from fear or desire. The noise of our thoughts drowns out the quiet, reassuring voice that leads us toward peace. The peace of God's voice. Another distinguishing factor between God's voice and our own thoughts is the peace that accompanies it. God's voice brings a sense of tranquility and calm that transcends circumstances. Even in the most challenging situations, when the world around us feels like it's falling apart, there is a quiet peace that anchors us in His presence. This peace doesn't rely on external factors or outcomes. It is rooted in the trust that God is in control and that He will guide us through whatever comes. This peace stands in stark contrast to the turbulence often created by our own thoughts. When we are overwhelmed with anxiety, fear, or doubt, our thoughts can create a storm within. We might find ourselves caught in a cycle of worry, replaying scenarios over and over in our minds. imagining worst-case outcomes, or questioning our worth or abilities. This inner turmoil can leave us feeling disconnected, restless, and uncertain of the right course of action. God's peace, however, is a peace that surpasses all understanding. It's a peace that doesn't require all the answers to feel secure. It's a peace that is rooted in the certainty of God's love, guidance, and sovereignty. When we hear his voice, it brings a sense of calm assurance, even if the situation is still uncertain. The more we learn to recognize this peace, the easier it becomes to differentiate between God's voice and the chaos of our own thoughts. Recognizing God's voice? So how can we recognize God's voice when it speaks to us? One key indicator is the presence of peace. When you are faced with a difficult decision or a troubling situation, take a moment to pause, to quiet your mind, and to listen. If the thought brings peace, even if it challenges you or takes you out of your comfort zone, it is likely from God. This peace is not a fleeting or superficial calm. It is a deep, unwavering assurance that gives you the courage to move forward even when the road is difficult. For instance, God's voice may encourage you to reach out to someone who is struggling, whether emotionally, financially. It may prompt you to offer a helping hand, lend a listening ear, or provide support in a way that reflects his care and concern for the well-being of others. These acts of love and service are often not the result of our own desires or motivations, but rather the guidance of God's voice calling us to align our actions with his will. When we listen to God's voice, we are reminded that life is not just about personal achievement or accumulation, but about impacting the lives of others for the better. This shift in focus from self-centeredness to other-centeredness is a hallmark of divine guidance. Through his voice, God invites us to step outside of ourselves, to put aside our own comfort and desires in order to serve those around us. The call to compassion and selflessness. God's voice frequently calls us to act with compassion. Compassion involves recognizing the suffering of others and responding with empathy and a desire to alleviate their pain. It is not simply a feeling of sympathy, but a driving force that compels us to take action. God's love is unconditional, and he calls us to mirror that love by showing kindness and mercy to those in need. For example, God might place a person or a situation on your heart, prompting you to pray for them or to take tangible steps to help. Whether it's a friend going through a tough time, a stranger in need, or a broader societal issue, God's voice encourages us to look beyond our own immediate concerns and see the needs of others. These prompts can often challenge our comfort zones, calling us to sacrifice our time, resources, and energy for the sake of others. Selflessness is another key aspect of God's voice. When we are focused on ourselves, we may prioritize our own desires, comfort, and security above all else. However, God's voice invites us to live with a greater sense of purpose, one that involves putting the needs of others before our own. This is a radical shift from the natural inclination to focus on our personal needs and ambitions. God's voice calls us to give generously, not just financially, but with our time, love, and emotional energy. By focusing on others, we align ourselves with the heart of God, who gave his Son for the salvation of all people. Our own thoughts, focused on personal desires and insecurities. While God's voice directs our attention toward others, our own thoughts can often become preoccupied with personal desires, fears, and insecurities. Our minds are naturally inclined to think about what we want or need, and these thoughts can easily dominate our mental landscape. We may focus on career goals, material success, or personal relationships, becoming absorbed in our own ambitions or struggles. In times of stress or uncertainty, our thoughts may be clouded by anxiety or fear, causing us to become inward focused. We might worry about our own well-being, our future, or our ability to meet the expectations of others. These thoughts can lead us to become self-absorbed, focusing on our own problems and desires rather than the needs of those around us. It's easy to fall into the trap of believing that our own concerns are the most important, and we may unintentionally neglect the people in our lives who are also in need of attention, support, and love. Furthermore, our insecurities and fears can make us more self-centered. We may feel inadequate, doubting our abilities, or fearing rejection. In these moments, it can be difficult to focus on others when we are consumed by our own doubts. Our thoughts may keep us trapped in a cycle of self-criticism and comparison, causing us to ignore the needs of others in favor of trying to fix or protect ourselves. The tension between self-centered thoughts and God's call to love others. The tension between the self-centered nature of our thoughts and God's call to focus on others can be significant. When our thoughts are dominated by personal desires, fears, or insecurities, it can feel difficult to prioritize others. We may even feel as though we have nothing left to give or that our own problems are too pressing to focus on anyone else's needs. However, when we listen to God's voice, He gently redirects our focus. He reminds us that the more we focus on others, the more we experience His love and purpose in our own lives. God's love is never diminished when we share with others, it grows. By giving of ourselves to others, we experience the fullness of God's grace and deepen our connection with Him. God's voice leads us to a life of fulfillment and meaning, rooted not in self-interest, but in service to others. In addition, focusing on others can help alleviate the grip of our own insecurities. When we step out of ourselves and act in compassion and love, we experience a sense of purpose and belonging that goes beyond our personal struggles. Serving others can be a powerful antidote to the self-absorption that often arises from fear or insecurity. God calls us to act beyond our emotions and circumstances, trusting that He will provide for our needs as we serve those around us. Recognizing God's voice in the call to serve others. Recognizing God's voice in the call to serve others involves being attentive to His prompting and open to His guidance. It requires us to step outside of our own comfort zones and be willing to act on the needs of others, even when it is inconvenient or challenging. It may come through a sense of urgency in our hearts or a specific thought or impression that moves us to action. God's voice often comes quietly but persistently, guiding us to look beyond ourselves and make a difference in the lives of others. In moments of uncertainty or selfishness, it can be helpful to pause and reflect on the people and situations God may be prompting us to notice. Praying for guidance and asking God to help us see others as He does can open our hearts to His calling. The more we practice listening to God's voice and acting on His promptings, the more we will grow in love, compassion, and selflessness, reflecting His heart in all that we do, living a life of service and love. Ultimately, focusing on others is not just about making individual decisions. It is about adopting a lifestyle that reflects the love of God. When we listen to God's voice, we begin to see the world through His eyes, understanding that we are all connected and called to care for one another. The more we focus on others, the more we become like Christ, who lived a life of selfless love and service. Through God's voice, we are invited to live a life of purpose, pouring out His love to those around us and making a lasting impact on the world. Consistency. Understanding the steady nature of God's voice. In the midst of the unpredictable and often chaotic nature of life, the ability to discern between the voice of God and our own thoughts is a crucial skill. One of the defining characteristics of God's voice is its consistency. God's guidance remains unwavering and aligned with His nature, offering us that provides clarity, direction, and purpose. This consistency is not only a reflection of His character, but also a means through which He communicates with us, allowing us to follow His will with confidence. In contrast, our own thoughts can fluctuate, often influenced by our emotions, circumstances, or external pressures. Understanding the difference between these two can help us more effectively tune into God's voice and recognize when our own thoughts are leading us astray. The consistency of God's voice. God's voice is marked by a deep, unwavering consistency. Unlike the ever-changing nature of human thoughts, His guidance is rooted in His unchanging nature. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, Hebrews 13:8, and His voice reflects that constancy. When God speaks to us, the themes and messages He communicates are often repeated, emphasizing key principles that align with His character and His will for our lives. For example, God's voice consistently calls us to love others, to pursue holiness, and to trust in His plan for us. These themes are woven throughout Scripture and continually affirmed through prayer, worship, and reflection. Even when God challenges us or calls us to step out of our comfort zones, the underlying message remains consistent. He is with us, He loves us, and He desires what is best for us. This consistency brings stability and peace, allowing us to trust that God's guidance is not only reliable, but also aligned with His eternal purpose. God's voice may not always sound the same in every situation, but the core themes, love, truth, faith, and hope, are always present. For instance, if you are struggling with a difficult decision, God's voice may guide you with words of peace and encouragement, affirming that He will be with you through the process. The consistency of His message, even when expressed in different ways, helps to reinforce His presence and His will, providing you with the confidence to move forward. Fluctuating thoughts, the influence of emotions and circumstances. In stark contrast to the consistency of God's voice, our own thoughts can be highly unpredictable, influenced by a wide range of factors. Our emotions, circumstances, and external pressures can cause our thoughts to fluctuate rapidly, leading us in conflicting directions. One moment we may feel confident in a decision, and the next we may be gripped by fear, doubt, or uncertainty. This inconsistency in our thoughts makes it difficult to trust them fully or rely on them for guidance. For example, when we are faced with a challenge or decision, our initial thoughts may be driven by fear or anxiety, causing us to second-guess our choices or feel paralyzed by indecision. Conviction. The gentle, loving voice of God. God's voice is often described as convicting, but this conviction is not harsh, critical, or condemning. Instead, it is loving, gentle, and leads us toward growth and spiritual development. The conviction of God's voice does not force us into a decision or cause us to feel overwhelmed or trapped. Rather, it nudges us in the right direction, inviting us to align our hearts and actions with His will. Conviction from God typically comes with a sense of clarity and purpose. It may challenge us to make difficult decisions, to step out of our comfort zones, or to change behaviors that no longer serve us or reflect His love. However, even when the message is challenging, God's voice brings a sense of peace and assurance, knowing that His purpose for us is always for our good and His glory. For instance, when we are struggling with a particular area of our lives, whether it's a relationship, a personal habit, or a life decision, God's conviction gently calls us to recognize what needs to change. This conviction may come through scripture, prayer, or a deep inner prompting. It doesn't overwhelm us with guilt or shame, but rather calls us to transformation, inviting us to become more like Christ. So the conviction that comes from God brings growth and healing, leading us to greater spiritual maturity and alignment with His will. One of the hallmarks of God's conviction is its consistency. When God speaks, He often repeats His message or brings it to our attention in multiple ways, affirming that He is calling us to a particular action or change. This consistency offers us reassurance, even when the changes required are difficult or uncomfortable. Confusion, the chaotic noise of our own thoughts. In contrast to God's convicting voice, our own thoughts can often lead us into confusion. Our minds can become filled with conflicting emotions, doubts, fears, and desires, making it difficult to know which direction to take. When we listen to our thoughts, we may find ourselves torn between different options, unsure of what is truly the right choice. Unlike the clarity that comes from God's conviction, our thoughts can create chaos. One moment we might feel confident about a decision, but the next we may second-guess ourselves, overwhelmed by fear or uncertainty. Our thoughts may pull us in many directions, leading to indecision and a lack of peace. We may overthink situations, replaying different scenarios in our minds, imagining worst-case outcomes, or worrying about how others will perceive us. This constant mental noise makes it difficult to find a clear path forward. Confusion can also arise when our thoughts are influenced by external pressures, society, family, or even our own past experiences. We may make decisions based on what others expect of us, or we might be influenced by societal standards of success, which can lead us to pursue goals that are not aligned with God's will for our lives. This external noise can drown out the quiet, reassuring voice of God, causing us to feel lost or unsure of our purpose. When we are confused, we may also experience self-doubt. We question our abilities, our worth, and our ability to make the right choices. We become preoccupied with what could go wrong, paralyzed by the fear of failure or rejection. This self-doubt can lead us to avoid making decisions altogether, staying stuck in a place of indecision. This is often a sign that we are relying too heavily on our own thoughts and not fully trusting in God's leading. The role of emotions in conviction and confusion. One of the key differences between conviction and confusion is how they affect our emotions. God's conviction, while challenging at times, ultimately brings peace and confidence. It is accompanied by a sense of purpose, knowing that we are being called to something greater than ourselves. Even if the decision requires sacrifice or stepping into the unknown, there is a deep inner peace that comes with knowing we are following God's guidance. On the other hand, confusion often brings emotional turmoil. When we listen to our own thoughts, we may experience anxiety, fear, frustration, or uncertainty. These emotions can cloud our judgment, making it difficult to think clearly or discern the right path. Confusion causes us to feel unsettled, unsure of ourselves and the choices we need to make. It leads to a restless spirit, unable to find peace or direction. In moments of confusion, we may also feel overwhelmed by the weight of our emotions, whether it's fear of failure, the desire to please others, or the pressure to live up to expectations. These emotions can lead us down paths that are not aligned with our true purpose, causing us to chase after things that bring temporary satisfaction, but ultimately leave us unfulfilled. And at the end of the day, how to discern between conviction and confusion. Discerning between God's conviction and our own confusion requires a quieting of the mind and heart. When we are faced with a decision or a difficult situation, it's important to take time to pray, reflect, and listen for God's voice. God's conviction is often accompanied by peace, clarity, and a sense of purpose, even when the message is challenging. If we feel overwhelmed, anxious, or uncertain, it's likely that we are listening to the chaotic noise of our own thoughts rather than God's gentle guidance. To discern God's voice from our own thoughts, it can also help to seek counsel from trusted spiritual mentors or to spend time in Scripture. Often God's conviction aligns with the truth found in His Word, guiding us to make choices that honor Him and reflect His character. When we compare the guidance we feel with the teachings of Scripture, we can more clearly recognize whether it is from God or from our own confusion. The role of trust in God's conviction. Ultimately, one of the key ways to move from confusion to conviction is through trust. Trusting that God's guidance is for our good, even when we don't fully understand the path ahead, is essential. As we grow in our relationship with God, we begin to recognize His voice more clearly, trusting that His conviction will always lead us toward growth and transformation. When we trust God, we allow His loving, gentle voice to convict us, leading us towards spiritual development and a life of purpose. In contrast, when we rely on our own thoughts, we often get lost in confusion, doubt, and fear. The choice is ours, Will we listen to the convicting, loving voice of God, or will we allow our own thoughts to lead us in circles? You're ready as hell. I called you for 6 months of hearing God's voice in the journey of life. In the quest for direction and purpose in life, many of us seek guidance, whether through our own thoughts, the advice of others, or spiritual guidance. This purpose transcends personal desires and directs us toward actions that serve not only our well-being, but also contribute to the betterment of the world around us. On the other hand, our own thoughts can often lead us in circles, focused on short-term desires or self-centered ambitions. While our minds might be filled with ideas, they may lack clarity in terms of long-term vision and a sense of a greater purpose. This difference between the clarity of divine guidance and the often scattered nature of human thoughts is crucial to understanding how God's voice can reshape our lives and redirect our paths. How God's voice? God's voice provides clear direction. When we turn to God for direction, His voice tends to provide clarity in the midst of uncertainty. While we might be overwhelmed by choices or unsure of the path forward, God's guidance cuts through the fog, offering us specific direction. It may not always give us the entire roadmap, but it shows us the next step to take, and that step brings with it a deep sense of peace and confidence. For example, you may be at a crossroads in your life, trying to decide between different career paths, relationships, or projects. When you seek God's guidance, you might feel a sense of conviction about a particular choice, one that feels right in your heart, even if it's not the easiest or most convenient option. This conviction often comes with a deep assurance that this is the way to go, even if the journey is challenging or unfamiliar. God's voice speaks directly to our hearts, guiding us with a sense of certainty that transcends logic or external pressures. Our own thoughts, in contrast, can often be clouded by external influences such as societal expectations, fear of failure, or desire to please others. We may bounce between options, unable to settle on one, and get stuck in a cycle of indecision. Without a clear sense of purpose, our thoughts tend to be reactive, driven by immediate concerns rather than a long-term vision for our lives. And God's voice, however, offers more than just a choice. It provides a purpose behind that choice, aligning our actions with His greater plan for us. Purpose beyond self-interest. Another important distinction between God's voice and our thoughts is the nature of the purpose that each provides. When God speaks, He often directs us toward actions that serve the greater good, actions that align with His will and that benefit others. His guidance pulls us out of our self-centered inclinations and invites us to think beyond ourselves. For example, you may feel a sense of God calling you to volunteer your time to serve others or to speak out for a cause that promotes justice and compassion. While your thoughts might lead you to focus on your own comfort, career goals, or personal desires, God's voice challenges you to step outside of your own interests and act in ways that contribute to the well-being of others. His purpose encourages selflessness, humility, and love toward our neighbors, asking us to use our talents and resources for a higher cause. This is not to say that God's voice disregards our needs or desires. It simply places them within a larger framework. When we align with His purpose, our own needs often find fulfillment in unexpected ways. Rather than being focused solely on our own ambitions or fears, we begin to see our lives as part of something greater. We realize that the work we do, the relationships we nurture, and the choices we make are all connected to a larger purpose that serves God's kingdom and His plan for humanity. Our own thoughts, however, are frequently centered on our immediate wants and self-interest. We often find ourselves chasing after things that provide short-term satisfaction. whether that's career success, material wealth, or social validation. Our own thoughts, on the other hand, can be loud, rapid, and uncontrollable, particularly during moments of stress, anxiety, or distraction. Understanding the difference between God's still, calm voice and the noisy clamor of our own thoughts can help us better tune into His guidance and find peace amidst the noise. God's voice requires stillness. God's voice is often described as still and small, as seen in the biblical account of the prophet Elijah. After a dramatic display of wind, fire, and earthquakes, God's voice came in a gentle whisper. 1 Kings 19:11-12. This quietness signifies the nature of God's communication. It doesn't compete with the noise of the world, but instead invites us to enter into a space of quietness and attentiveness. In order to hear God's voice clearly, we must be still, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. Stillness is more than the absence of external noise. It involves quieting our hearts and minds, slowing down the rapid flow of thoughts that often crowd our consciousness. When we are still, we create space for God to speak in a way that is clear and focused. In these moments of silence, we are able to let go of distractions and listen intently for the guidance that comes from God. This requires intentional effort and discipline. It is easy to become distracted by the hustle and bustle of life, but in moments of stillness, we invite God to fill our hearts with His presence. God's voice, while gentle and quiet, is profoundly powerful. It has the ability to speak directly to our hearts, bringing peace, direction, and clarity. When we intentionally quiet our minds and hearts, we are better able to discern His leading and recognize the subtle ways in which He communicates with us. Stillness allows us to connect with God on a deeper level, creating an intimate space for His voice to resonate in our lives. The noise of our own thoughts. In contrast to the stillness of God's voice, our own thoughts can often be loud, rapid, and overwhelming. Our minds are filled with a constant stream of thoughts, many of which are driven by emotion, fear, or distraction. In times of stress or uncertainty, our thoughts can become frantic, racing from one concern to another. This mental noise can drown out God's gentle voice, making it difficult to hear His guidance or find peace. When we are under pressure, our thoughts may become chaotic and uncontrolled. We may worry about the future, fret over decisions, or replay past mistakes in our minds. This constant mental activity creates a sense of restlessness, preventing us from entering into the stillness needed to hear God's voice. The rapid-fire nature of our thoughts can make it challenging to focus on anything for long periods, further drowning out the possibility of hearing God's quiet whisper. Emotions such as anxiety, fear, and uncertainty can amplify this noise. When we are anxious, our minds often race with what-if scenarios, imagining the worst possible outcomes. In these moments, it becomes difficult to discern between rational thoughts and the noise generated by our emotions. This confusion can lead to decision-making based on fear or impulse, rather than clarity and peace. Furthermore, external distractions can add to the noise of our thoughts. In a world filled with constant information, social media, and endless notifications, it can be hard to quiet the mind long enough to hear God's voice. Our attention is pulled in multiple directions, and it becomes increasingly difficult to find moments of true stillness. This constant bombardment of information, while often harmless, contributes to the mental noise that clouds our ability to hear the still, quiet voice of God. The struggle between stillness and noise is an ongoing challenge for many people. Life's demands, combined with our own inner turbulence, often make it difficult to find the peace and quiet needed to hear God's voice clearly. The noise of the world and the chaos of our own thoughts create an environment where hearing from God becomes more difficult. It is easy to become consumed with the constant distractions of modern life, leading us further away from the stillness that is necessary for connecting with God. In times of stress, anxiety, or busyness, it is easy to be swept away by the noise in our minds and around us. We may find ourselves running on autopilot, constantly reacting to the demands of life without taking the time to pause and listen for God's voice. The pressures of work, relationships, and personal responsibilities can all contribute to the noise that fills our minds and hearts, leaving little room for quiet reflection. However, it is precisely in these moments of noise and distraction that the need for stillness becomes even more critical. In order to hear God's voice clearly, we must intentionally create space for quiet reflection and prayer. This requires us to step away from the distractions and noise of everyday life and make the conscious choice to seek God in the stillness. Creating space for stillness? In order to hear God's voice amidst the noise, it is necessary to create intentional space for stillness. This might involve setting aside time each day for quiet reflection, meditation, or prayer. Finding a quiet place where you can be free from distractions allows you to focus your mind and heart on God. This could be in a quiet room, a park, or a place in nature where you can disconnect from the noise of the world. Stillness can also be cultivated through mindfulness practices. By learning to focus on our breath, we can calm the racing thoughts and bring ourselves into a more peaceful state. Practicing mindfulness allows us to be present in the moment, letting go of the distractions that prevent us from hearing God's voice. Additionally, silence and solitude are powerful tools for stillness. Spending time alone with God, free from external distractions, helps to center our hearts and minds. In these moments of solitude, we can focus on God's presence and listen intently for His voice. Silence allows us to quiet the internal chatter and noise, creating the space necessary for God to speak into our lives. The peace of stillness. When we embrace stillness and allow ourselves to quiet the noise, we open ourselves to the peace that God's voice brings. In the stillness, we can hear the gentle whisper of His guidance, offering us direction, comfort, and reassurance. It is in the quiet moments that we are able to connect with God on a deeper level, receiving His love and wisdom that transcends the noise of the world. God's voice, though quiet and subtle, brings a deep sense of peace that calms the restlessness of our hearts and minds. The stillness allows us to be grounded in God's presence, giving us the clarity we need to navigate the challenges of life. It is in these quiet moments that we can find true rest and assurance, knowing that God is speaking to us with love, wisdom, and care. In a world filled with constant noise and distractions, hearing God's voice requires intentional stillness. The noise of our own thoughts and the external clamor of life can easily drown out God's quiet, yet powerful voice. However, when we create space for stillness through prayer, reflection, and mindfulness, we open ourselves to hearing God's guidance more clearly. It is in the stillness that we find peace, clarity, and the ability to listen attentively to the voice of God, leading us toward a deeper connection with Him. Conclusion: embracing stillness to hear God's voice. In a world that often demands our attention from every angle, it is increasingly difficult to find moments of true stillness. The constant noise, both external and internal, can overwhelm us and prevent us from hearing the quiet yet powerful voice of God. Our thoughts can race, filled with worries, anxieties, and distractions that drown out His gentle whispers. However, as we reflect on the nature of God's voice, we are reminded that it is often found in the stillness, in the quiet moments where we intentionally pause and open ourselves to His presence. To hear God's voice, we must be willing to set aside the noise. This involves more than simply quieting the world around us. It requires quieting the noise within ourselves. The constant chatter of our minds, fueled by emotions like fear, doubt, and uncertainty, can easily pull our focus away from God. It is only in moments of stillness that we can truly hear the subtle guidance of the Holy Spirit. This process takes discipline, patience, and a deep desire to connect with God on a deeper level. It requires us to let go of the chaos, to trust that God is speaking even when His voice seems faint, and to trust that He will lead us in His perfect timing. Stillness is not an escape from life's challenges or a retreat into isolation. Rather, it is an invitation to draw nearer to God. It is in these quiet moments that we receive His peace and clarity, helping us navigate the noise and stress of daily life with a sense of direction and purpose. When we pause and listen, we are reminded that God's presence is always with us, ready to guide, comfort, and provide wisdom. We need only make space to hear Him. It's important to recognize that stillness does not always mean complete silence. Rather, it's an intentional act of turning our hearts toward God, even in the midst of noise. It might involve setting aside time for prayer, meditation, or simply being present in the moment. By practicing stillness, We are making room for God to speak to us, whether through scripture, through prayer, or through the gentle promptings of the Holy Spirit. Through this practice, we are able to tune out the distractions and hear more clearly what he wants to reveal. As we grow in our ability to embrace stillness, we begin to notice the profound difference between the noise of our own thoughts and the voice of God. Our thoughts can often lead us in circles, consumed with worries, self-doubt, or external pressures. But God's voice brings peace, clarity, and purpose. When we choose to listen to him, we find ourselves grounded in his truth and filled with the assurance that we are not alone. The noise of life may continue to swirl around us, but in the stillness, we are reminded that we are held in God's loving embrace. In our busy, distracted world, making space for stillness is not easy. It requires us to be intentional, to carve out moments of quiet amidst the noise. Yet when we do, we are not only able to hear God's voice more clearly, but also experience the peace and direction that comes from him. In the stillness, we find that God is always speaking, always guiding us toward greater understanding, growth, and purpose. In closing, let us commit to embracing stillness in our lives. Let us make time to quiet our hearts and minds, to listen for God's voice amidst the clamor of the world, and to seek his guidance in the moments of quiet reflection. In doing so, we will not only hear his voice more clearly, but will be transformed by his presence, peace, and love. The noise will always be present, but through stillness, we can hear the voice of God leading us forward with purpose and clarity. So take a moment today to pause. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and invite the stillness into your heart. Let go of the distractions, the worries, and the noise. Allow God's voice to speak to you in the quiet, knowing that he is always near, ready to guide and lead you with love and grace.